from the NR Hour Sports Show. This is episode 741. Joined by a special guest. His name is John Buffone. He's a sports journalist from Chicago, and he has a show called Buffone 55, Bears Bar Room, and Pass on the Mic podcast. So we're looking forward to this show. And obviously, he's big into boxing and former USA Today Network analyst too. So we're gonna get to all of that. But first of all, John, thank you again for joining me. How are you and your family doing so far during the sub situation?
We're doing well. Doing the best we can given given the current situation. But yeah, everything's going well. Excited. A lot of podcasts going on right now. It's the off season for football, but there is no off season in football. So we always keep churning out the content there. So it's an exciting time.
Yeah. So obviously, I want to start off with your career and journey. And for you, while growing up, and when did you start realizing that you wanted to be in the sports industry, and especially being an analyst, and who was that one person that you looked up to in the sports industry?
Yeah, so I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, about 45 minutes north of Pittsburgh, and much like most teenage boys, there comes the realization that eventually you're not going to be a professional athlete. So I played sports and I realized it wasn't going to happen for me, but I always had a big influence in my life, and that was my Uncle Doug. He played 15 years for the Chicago Bears from 1966 to 1981. And after he was done playing for the Bears, he did all the post-game shows on 670 AM The Score, a very well-known radio personality out there, obviously a well-known player out there, played for the team for 15 years. And so that always inspired me that if I wanted to stay around sports, which I love so much, I was going to have to learn how to talk and write about them. So in college, I majored in broadcast journalism with a specialization in television broadcasting. And then that's where the kind of diverse career really started. So after college, my first gig was hosting a sports radio show on a small AM station in Kittanning, Pennsylvania, at 1,000 watts. I think maybe 13 people actually got the station. It was very, very, very small. So, but it was my own show. I could produce it, I could host it, and we didn't get a lot of call-ins, so I had to learn how to basically talk to myself for an hour and a half or 2 hours. So that kind of sharpened my skill of how to just keep myself occupied with a microphone in front of me. And then my Uncle Doug, who was still doing stuff in Chicago, he was still doing a lot of stuff for NFL Films. He was doing stuff for the radio. He's making appearances. He calls me and says, "Listen, how about I come on your show once a week and we talk football?" And he's my uncle and everything, and I appreciate that. But this is a guy whose schedule is very full, and he's in high demand, and he did not have to carve out that amount of time to come on my rinky-dink little show. So he'd come on once a week, and he said, "I can do 15 minutes." And I was like, "Well, that's great." And it always turned into 30 minutes or 40 minutes. And we just kept talking, and he broke down the NFL like nobody else could. And I was just so appreciative of that, because not just was he helping to boost my ratings and, get people to listen, but he was also showing me the ropes on how to conduct a radio show. He how to make sure you never have dead air, how to make sure that you keep your listeners engaged, make sure that you have that kind of voice that people will listen to and you don't just kind of trail off. So I was just that experience that, there were probably hundreds of people in my shoes that would have loved to have him come on their show, would have loved to have that kind of connection. And it was just my Uncle Doug, because, I'd known him since I was born. I mean, we were just family, and he was Uncle Doug first and the football player second. So it was just that family connection. And so after hosting my radio show for almost 3 years, I got a job covering a lot of prep high school and minor league sports in central Pennsylvania. I was working for a website and a newspaper out there. And I did that for about 4 years. And then I said, why not just try my hand at television? So for 2 years, I was a television reporter for a cable station in Pennsylvania, covering regular news, which is something I had never done before. I was covering, politics and legislation and, crimes and things like that, which was so out of my comfort zone, but it was something that was necessary because it really taught me a different style. It taught me how to deliver things. It really helped me on screen because I never did television professionally. I did it in college, but I never did it professionally. So it really was able to round out my skills as far as kind of bringing it all home, because I started in radio, then I went to newspaper, and then I went to television. And then an incredible opportunity came up in 2018 with the USA Today network. They needed an outdoors reporter, covering like hiking, hunting, fishing, the great outdoors, like that kind of stuff. And it just so happens I grew up in the woods. That was my culture. I grew up, in the country, always outside doing stuff. So I was able to get that job, and I did that for 2 years, and it was just so much fun. And then I believe in 2020, you start reevaluating your career. You kind of you want to see where you want to go from there. And I gained so much knowledge of the media industry because working in radio, you understand how that works, and same with newspaper, and then in television. I didn't know it at the time, but I was gaining all of this knowledge about how media works and how television works, radio, newspaper. So I was offered a job by the federal government to run public relations for the 2020 census in the state of Pennsylvania.
Oh, wow.
And at first you think, well, I mean, I've just been a reporter my whole life. This is what I love doing. I loved my current job. And then I started thinking about, how I could really use that knowledge that I obtained and use it all in one focused effort. And that was a very rewarding experience because the 2020 census and the census in general is incredibly important for everybody. And it was great to be a spokesperson for the federal government, doing television interviews, doing radio interviews, doing newspaper interviews, and talking about the importance of the census. And so I did that all through through 2020, all through the pandemic, which was not easy because you can't really do a whole lot of in-person interviews. So everything was going online. We were doing a lot of phone interviews, a lot of written responses. And then recently I decided to stay I decided to move into the private sector, and now I'm a media relations specialist, which means I handle a lot of clients whenever it comes to how they want to handle their interviews, handle how they want to do their media outreach, when they want to broker interviews with television or newspapers, and how they should approach a lot of these media outlets. So I'm still using all of that knowledge that I gained working in all these different outlets and all these different mediums and all these different industries. I'm using that today in my current job, which is it's just so cool because you really get to teach people things that you've had to learn the hard way sometimes. And so you get to kind of coach these people up on how to deal with the media, how to approach the media, how to handle yourself in an interview. And it's just a really rewarding experience. So it's crazy to think just 10 years ago, in 2010 is when I started my radio show. And now in the year 2021, all this stuff that I did, and this isn't bragging. It's just, you look back and I just did a whole bunch of stuff. There's just a whole bunch of different stuff there. So that's a lot to fit into one decade. And so that's kind of I know that's not a short version, but that's the short version of how I got to where I am now.
That's amazing. That's a lot of stuff you've done in like 11 years. That's great.
Yeah.
So who was that? Who did you have like a role model in the sports industry? Who was that one person as a journalist that you looked up to?
Oh, it was always going to be my Uncle Doug. It was always going to be him. And just because even whenever I was working in newspaper and I got out of radio, I still listened to him all the time. We would still text back and forth about the Chicago Bears. We would talk on the phone, and I would still just listen to him and the passion that he had for what he did. And I always said, I want to do something that I'm as passionate like that. I want to be as passionate as he is about this, because you could just feel it through the microphone. Even if you weren't watching anything, you could just hear it in his voice. And so I always tried to emulate myself like him. And that's where a lot of the podcasting came in. And I kind of left that part out, but because it's the most recent part of my career. But I was approached by Bears Barroom about, nearly 5 years ago now. And I replied to something on their social media, and they just said, "Hey, any chance you're related to Doug Buffone?" And I'm like, well, funny story. Yeah, actually I am. So, and my uncle, passed away in 2015, and that was very hard for me. That was very difficult to kind of lose your professional mentor, and I wasn't really ready for that. I don't think anybody was ready for that. And so they approached me about doing a show on the network, and they said, well, and I said, yeah, but I want to make sure that it's different. I want to make sure that it has my voice on it, and I also want to make sure, because I know that they did approach me because of my last name. I'm not going to be that naive to think that I didn't play a part into it. And so I wanted to make sure that I was paying homage, because I consider my uncle a Chicago radio kind of legend, just because of his incredible legendary rants in Chicago. And if you look it up on YouTube, Doug Buffone rant, there's about 30 of them that are fantastic. So I wanted to do something that I could make sure that I paid homage to him. And that's why the show is called Buffone 55. That's the number that he wore for the Chicago Bears, and that's why we're branded as such. And then we do a segment that's called B55, where I get 5 subjects about the Chicago Bears, and each one I have 55 seconds to give my response, and it's timed and everything, and so that's really developed my quick talking abilities, because it's really hard to cram a lot of that stuff into 55 seconds. But the whole show, and especially that segment, is my tribute to him, because without him and without his guidance and without him saying, listen, you guys stick with it, because there was plenty of times when I wanted to quit, especially in radio. I was not making much money. Loans were piling up, and it's just like, I don't know how I'm going to live like this. And I would talk to him on the phone, and he'd say, listen, this ain't easy, but you got to stick with it. You're good enough. Stick with it. Stick it out. He's like, I'll keep coming on the show. He's like, you're going to regret it if you quit now. And so without him, I might have quit. I might have just given it up. And so I wanted to make sure that the show that I was doing, it always paid homage to him, because they're always going to know his name in Chicago, and they're always going to understand what he did on the field, and they're always going to understand what he did as a radio host. But I wanted to make sure that people knew how great he was away from all that as well. He was not required to help me out, and he had so much going on that he didn't need to, and I would not have expected him to. And he went above and beyond to make sure that his nephew in Pennsylvania was still was on the right track. So that's why the show that we do at Buffone 55, it's about the Chicago Bears. We do weekly updates through the season, and then we do once a month in the off season. But that's why it has the moniker that it does. That's why I'm wearing the Buffone 55 hoodie right now. It's all because of him, and that's just kind of how we pay tribute.
Wow, that's amazing. And sorry for your loss. And obviously he was a Bears legend. Everybody knew him, and man, that's a good way to honor him, having your own show like that. And I want to ask you though, obviously in this industry, it's all about building network connections and making it's really important to make connections. So for you, what's it like working with other like reporters, journalists out there, and getting to know them, their personalities, and obviously the people that you work with on your radio station? So what's it like just networking, connecting in this industry?
Yeah, and it's because of what I did before, which is why I was so prepared for what I do now with media relations, because I know how reporters think, and I know what they want to hear, I know what they don't want to hear, and a lot of reporters are different, and even especially when you consider newspaper reporters versus television reporters, those are very, very different breeds. As much as people think they're the same, and people do cross over, and I was a newspaper reporter who happened to cross over into TV, and I'm kind of that hybrid, but that's not always the case. So it's always about making connections, and I'm not saying that as a superficial way, but I'm able to plug into some of those connections that I made, because a lot of the people that I worked with, or a lot of the people that I saw at different stories, because when you're a TV reporter and there's a big story, every other TV reporter from every other station is there as well. So you get to know them, and you get to talk to them, and you become friends, and you kind of exchange conversations, and you follow each other on Twitter, and you kind of know each other, even though you don't work together, you know each other, you feel like you become friends like that. And so you never know, especially in this industry, where they're going to end up. So a lot of these reporters that I became friends with, just working with in Pennsylvania, they have spread out, and now I know that I have connections out in the state of Oregon. I know I have connections down in Florida. I know I have connections in Texas, in Colorado, in Montana, and New England, all throughout the New England region, especially Boston. And so yeah, it's important to first of all, always be friendly to always be friendly to everybody. Even I know I know it's not required, and I know sometimes reporters get the bad rap of sometimes being standoffish around other reporters, and that's true.
Right.
But I always was super friendly to everybody, and that pays off. And I'm not saying be kind because they might give you something someday, but I'm just saying that's just a benefit of that, because
Right.
now if we get a client in, or I have somebody who comes in and says, hey, we'd really like to get some media coverage in Corpus Christi, Texas. Well, it just so happens that I know some people that work in Corpus Christi, Texas, because they used to work in either Pennsylvania or Maryland. It's like, well, what if we want to get some, media coverage in the West Coast? Well, I can't promise that we will, but at least I know someone there, and I know that we're on good terms. So it's that when it's media relations, that's just not, relations from the client to the media. That's me and the media as well, because I built these connections with people while working in the media, and now I'm able to use that to my advantage. But if I was an absolute jerk to everybody while I was a reporter, and I was just like, hey, I'm going to ask the questions, I'm going to dictate this, guys, get out of my way, I'm the most important reporter here, and they go to a different market, or they're up in Boston, and I give them a call and say, hey, I got this client who's really like to pitch this story to you. They're like, no, you were a jerk to me 5 years ago, I'm not talking to you now. So it's about building not just the relationships, but building those friendships, because a lot of these people are my friends now. And we keep in contact, and some of them live far away, but we keep in touch through social media, and that has created a whole new different wavelength of communication. So you never know when somebody is going to be in a spot where you might need to help them, and or they may need to help you. There's been plenty of times where I've had reporters contact me because they know who my clients are, and they say, or whenever I was working with the Census Bureau last year, there's plenty of times where they would call me and like, hey, we're doing this story on the census. We'd really like to get an interview with somebody. We know it's hard to talk to somebody in the federal level. Can you help me out?
Right.
And I was able to do that. And so it's you might need to help somebody. They may need to help you. That's what, relationships, and especially media relations, are all about.
I want to ask you about your experience at USA Today. What was that like working with them? And I had someone from USA Today last year on the show. Her name is Mackenzie Salmon, if you know her. Yeah, she works there. But what was your experience there at USA Today?
Yeah, so I was a USA Today network employee, which means I was in the state of Pennsylvania. So all of my stuff would be under that USA Today umbrella, and then all of my stuff would go into basically every newspaper that USA Today owns in Pennsylvania. That's where my stuff would go into. So that's about 15 publications throughout the state of Pennsylvania. That was intense, because whenever I was first brought in, it was going to be more of a local level kind of thing, the central Pennsylvania kind of thing. And then as media, as it happens in media, things morph quickly, and they get changed, and your roles get changed, and the expectations change. And then they said, okay, you're not really just the central PA person anymore. You're going to be the state of Pennsylvania outdoors reporter. And so I knew that my audience was going to be increasing. I knew that more people, which is good. You always want more people to read your stuff. You always want more people to see your content. But also that increases the risk of, not risk, but the probability that someone's going to send you a nasty email, or they're gonna give you they're gonna say that you're no good, or this article is trash, or things like that. So it was a little intimidating whenever you see some of my stuff that was given on a big state level, and a good handful of them did go on the national level. They were put out by USA Today. So so whenever with great exposure comes the accolades of that, where you're being nationally recognized, or people are going to be able to see your name all across the country. But that also means that people all across the country can see your name, and they can say whatever they want to you. So that's good and bad, but I had a blast there. I mean, I'll be honest, it was the coolest beat. I was always outdoors. I was out either on a hiking trail, or I was, out on a body of water, and doing a lot of meeting a lot of cool people, a lot of different people. That was an incredibly fun beat, and I had a blast while I was there. So you won't hear me say anything bad about it.
So now I want to ask you though, obviously you have your own show, but take me back to your first experience, to your first interview. What would you say your most memorable interview you've done?
One of my most memorable interviews, and there have been quite a few, but I want to say it was on my radio show, and I was only about 22 years old, and we got the safety for the Pittsburgh Steelers to come on, Will Allen.
Oh, wow.
And we didn't know, his agent actually contacted me, which I'm like, I have no idea. I'm like, why is your agent contacting me? I'm a 22-year-old kid that runs a radio show that no one listens to. But I'm like, yeah, sure, we'll take Will Allen. That's great. And so it was after a Monday, it was a Tuesday. I remember this vividly. It was after a Monday night game, and Ben Roethlisberger got hurt. And so I wanted to ask him about that, but we weren't sure if he was actually going to come on because we hadn't heard anything for a couple days, and the agent wasn't getting back to me. And so, or his publicist or whoever it was, wasn't getting back to me. And finally, the show started at 7:00. Finally, at 6:50, the person calls me and says, "Hey, yeah, just to confirm, Will's coming on. He'll call in about 5 minutes." And I was like, "Oh my God, it's actually happening." And so I was like, then all of a sudden, you're a 22-year-old kid about to interview your first real professional athlete, really. And so you get all this fear coming through you. And I'm sitting there, and I just remember, and I think I still have the tape of it, but I was just stuttering over every question, and every question probably took me about 45 seconds to get out because I had to elaborate on the question. And I'm like, well, how about this? And this happened, and this happened. It's as if he wasn't at the game. I was asking him these questions that took forever, and his responses were shorter than me asking the question. So that was really memorable because that was my first, sticking my toe into the water of interviewing professional athletes. And I remember I always tried to listen. As much as I hate listening to myself, I always tried to listen to myself afterwards to say, okay, you said too many times, and you kind of trailed off there, and you had some vocal fry here. We need to work on that. And so I listened back to that, and I said, never again am I going to let that happen, because you don't know how, as a small time radio host, you don't know how many times you're going to get opportunities like that to interview some big time players. So I listened to that, and I said, don't get nervous anymore. These are just people. You're just talking. And that really helped because I listened to myself kind of flounder a little bit. I said, I'm not going to let that happen again. So that was incredibly memorable. And then, just interviewing a lot of the guys from the Pittsburgh sports scene at the time, Andrew McCutcheon, who was with the Pirates at the time. And I was able to have a one-on-one interview with Jerome Bettis. And so, and then, once I got into television, it was not so much sports people, but I was interviewing, senators and governors at that point. So that's a whole different kind of nervousness where it's just like, this guy's kind of a big deal, and like, don't make yourself look like an idiot in front of the governor. So that was kind of a new kind of nervousness, because you're like, oh, they're athletes, they're cool, they're down to earth. I'm like, I don't know about these guys though, they're like elected officials. So, but a lot of them are down to earth too. So I was lucky enough that throughout my career, where I was in news and in sports, just to interview a lot of cool people. And it gets, I don't want to say you lose all of that nervousness, but I certainly have at least gotten more comfortable in that situation. And now that I'm in my, in my early 30s, it's just like, okay, let's have this conversation. Let's talk. But you still get that kind of nervous adrenaline every once in a while.
Yeah. Same thing with me. My first interview I've done was a hockey player from the Devils, Jim Down, if you know him. He came on, he was the first interviewer, and I was nervous there. And then it went on from there. Obviously you're the 741st episode here on the show, so I'm used to it now. So I keep, whenever I say reach out to these people, I say let's just talk and have a casual conversation and talk about sports and the journeys in life. So I'm used to it now, and it's fun. If you like I've gotten great advice from other people, and they said if you're passionate about something, keep going. And this is what I love, and learning other people's personalities is really important in this industry too. So.
Absolutely. And like you said, it becomes routine after a while, where you're not just like, okay, I have to say this. We're having a conversation. And I think that's what people appreciate the most. I think that's what people like to listen to the most, as it's a conversation, as if and this is why we're called the Barroom Network. You just listen to conversations as if you were at your local bar or you were at your local club. these are the conversations you'd be having, and these are the kind of conversations that would be engaging people. They don't want to hear the structured boom and then boom and then boom. No, let's just talk, and that's the stuff that really brings people in.
Yeah. But what a way to start your career with real Allen. That's crazy. That's amazing.
Yeah. I was nervous. I'm like, oh my God, I'm interviewing a Pittsburgh Steeler. I'm barely out of college. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm the only person in the because it was at night and I was the only person in the station. So it was just me. And it was live radio. And I was just like, oh God, please don't screw this up. Please don't screw this up. Even though there's hardly anyone listening, you're like, oh God, please don't screw this up. And it's intimidating. And it's something that turns a lot of people off from wanting to join the industry, because they think if I'm nervous now, I'm going to be nervous forever. And that's just not true. It just becomes part of your routine where you're confident enough and you're just like, okay, it's fine. Because there are not plenty of times, but there were a handful of times in television where your live shot does not go where you want it to go. And I remember one time I didn't freeze, but I stumbled so bad on live TV. It was the worst live hit I've ever had in my entire life. I looked like an absolute idiot. And then when I got back to the station, all of my coworkers are laughing their butts off. They're like, they had it paused so they could play it back and show it to me and show me how it looked. And it was horrifying to watch yourself struggle on live TV and just be like, what are you doing? You're literally yelling at yourself. Stop it. Fix it. What are you doing? And so whenever you look at it, you're just like, that was terrible. But the great thing about TV and the great thing about radio is you get another chance the next day and you can go out and you can fix it. And it's just like baseball. You have a bad game. Good news. There's another game tomorrow and you can fix it. So I always looked at it this way. You're never going to bat 1,000. So I looked at it. I'm like, wow, it's just like sports. I always compare everything to sports just because that's how I was brought up. But I was just like, man, I got my butt kicked today. There's another one tomorrow. Let's go get them. So you can't dwell on that stuff for too long.
Yeah. So I want to before we get to the madness in the sports that's happening right now. Obviously, all the sports are pretty much back, but for you, what have you learned as a journalist? And obviously last year we've been through a lot, and even still we're going through a lot. When the sports shut down, obviously everybody had to pivot into different directions and use multiple platforms. So for you, what have you learned as a journalist when the sports shut down and had to utilize other things?
Yeah, I've always been someone who thought that one of my biggest strengths was the person-to-person conversation. And whether it was as a television reporter or as a spokesperson for the federal government, I always felt like I was the strongest whenever I was face-to-face with somebody. And so when we had to start doing things online or strictly by phone, that's tough because you can't really show all of that body language that you're used to. You're not used to being as animated as possible. Right. And not to mention, when you're talking to somebody like you and I are talking right now, is even though I can see your face and it's simulating an actual conversation, I'm still talking to a computer screen. I'm still looking at a green dot on my screen there. And so and I was lucky enough that I spent a couple years talking to a camera. That was what I did for a living. But I think that what that really did was saying I had to get sharper with those kind of things. I had to get sharper with just my straight up vocal communication, because I can't be animated. I'm Italian, so I'm usually throwing my hands up like this, and so they're not going to see that on a phone call. So they're not going to understand my facial expressions. They're not going to understand always my context without that. So it really taught me that, be patient, because a lot of the times technology isn't always dependable. Right. And it also taught me that I need to be able to get my message across a lot better with just my voice, because a lot of the times when I did interviews last year, it was simply phone calls. We didn't even do Zoom. They just said, hey, let's do a phone call, and then we'll put your picture up on screen whenever we're running the interview. So it's not always easy just to get, a phone interview and try to get your entire point across the way that you would like to and show the importance of things. So there's got to be an inflection in your voice when you get excited, or when you got a serious thing, when something serious is, you're like, this is a very important thing that you have to do, and make sure your cadence is right. So I had to work a lot on my cadence to make sure that it was being delivered the right way. So it taught me different skills out of necessity, because I was relying on other things to get me through. And that taught me how to sharpen my my skills and kind of be a little more well-rounded. So like I said before, you never sound great on a Skype interview that they just use the audio on. You never sound great on like a Microsoft Teams thing, or even in Zoom and WebEx and all that other stuff. You never sound exactly like you want to. So you got to be able to understand that and make sure you do the best that you can.
Yeah, I mean, obviously everybody's using Clubhouse now. That's the most popular one now out there, Clubhouse, and
it's always a new one.
Yeah. Yeah, so that I never used that one before, but I gotta see what it is and what it entails. But I want to get into the madness though in the NFL real quick. Obviously, I want to start off with the local team, Chicago Bears, and you're gonna like this. We had Lance Briggs on the show last year, and we had Brian Urlacher this year on the show, and it was an honor talking to both of them, Bears legends, a Hall of Fame. So I just want to ask you though. Obviously, your uncle played for the Bears, so what's it like seeing this the Bears involved from the past till now? Obviously, they're still rebuilding. The quarterback, obviously, the struggle for them is a quarterback situation.
Yeah.
Mitchell Trubisky obviously gone. You bring in Andy Dalton. I'm a Cowboy fan, so
You took your backup.
Yeah. So obviously, you guys have Dalton. You guys were in the Russell Wilson discussions. I don't know how far they went into, but what's it like to seeing this team evolve, grow, but struggle at the quarterback position?
This is a very cyclical team. And what I mean by that is they're very consistent, and that's not good because this team has never had a 4,000-yard passer ever. Yeah. And so there's always been the problem at the quarterback position. Another way they're cyclical is they are able to cultivate these great defenses, but not be able to support them with any kind of offense. You look in the 2000s when they did have Lance and Brian Urlacher, and they had Peanut Tillman and Tommy Harris and all those guys. They had a great defense, and they had to try to rely on the likes of Rex Grossman and just subpar weapons on offense. And then you see in 2018 another historically good defense, getting so many turnovers and just it made Mitchell Trubisky look a lot better than he was, I think, at times. And so once again, you have a defense that's being wasted because the offense can't pull its weight. And so when they signed Andy Dalton, and there was a huge backlash on social media from Bears fans, but I get their frustration, but it wasn't directed at Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton's a fine guy. It was never about Andy Dalton. I think it was just out of frustration because Bears fans are like, here we go again, another retread quarterback. Because go the whole way back where all the quarterbacks for the Chicago Bears, they're either first round busts or they're a guy that washed out somewhere else and they think that they can resurrect his career. So you can go back to the late 90s when they drafted Cade McNown with their first round pick, washed out. And then they say, well, let's go get Rex Grossman. Didn't work out. They traded up to draft Mitchell Trubisky. Didn't work out. And then you look at some of the retreads they get. Cordell Stewart washed out of Pittsburgh. Well, let's try him in Chicago. Oh, Chris Chandler's 100 years old, but he had a couple good years with Atlanta. Let's get him in Chicago. Jason Campbell's no longer in Washington. Oh, let's get him in Chicago. Same with Mike. Well, they give Mike Glennon. They give Mike Glennon a contract. Doesn't work out. Kyle Orton, who was probably one of the better ones, if you want to look at the pantheon of quarterbacks in Chicago Bear history, one of the better ones. And whenever your best statistical quarterback is Jay Cutler, I mean that says a lot. And then they get another retro. Oh, Nick Foles was a Super Bowl MVP. Let's get him in here. No, and then it's like, well, Andy Dalton, he was pretty adequate with the Bengals for a bunch of years. Let's bring him in. So it's the same song and dance for the Chicago Bears every year. Let's hope the defense holds them to 13 points, and let's hold our breath if the offense actually scores a couple touchdowns. And so, and I also think there was a massive disappointment because, like you said, they were in the Russell Wilson sweepstakes. They did at least have an offer out there, and it looked like they might have been close to getting it. And then, you kind of tease Bears fans with the thought of Russell Wilson coming to Chicago, and then your consolation prize is Andy Dalton. And once again, Andy Dalton, fine guy. It's not about him, but it's about the position itself. And so the frustration was just aimed at the front office who retained a GM and a head coach whenever it looks like this team should probably be rebuilding, yet the coach and GM are in win now mode. Frustration at you hired an offensive guru as a head coach, but you're relying on your defense to carry you through this season. It's a frustration at the fact that Bears fans constantly just get like all the marketing is around, remember the 85 Bears? Well, yeah, but the 85 Bears were 36 years ago. I wasn't alive. A lot of Bears fans weren't alive. We're tired of hearing about the 85 Bears. They're historically good, take a lot of pride in the team, the Super Bowl shuffle, all that other stuff. But you got to stop acting like it just happened last year. You got to stop acting like 85 was, 2015. It's not even close. And so I think Bears fans are just tired of being sold on all of this, this year, and we're going to fix the quarterback position. At the end of the year press conference, Ryan Pace, Ted Phillips, the president, and Matt Nagy all talked about the quarterback position is first and foremost in the offseason. That we're going to fix the quarterback position. They admitted, had we gotten the quarterback position completely right? No. And they said they were going to do all this collaboration. And what did all that collaboration get you? It got you Andy Dalton. So I think that's what, once again, not trying to rip on the guy, but it's just like you get a guy like Andy Dalton, the fans are going to be upset because this is just, once again, this team is going to be built for, well, they can't go 8-8 anymore because they added a game. So they're probably going to go 8-9 or 9-8, maybe squeak into the wild card game and get blown out like they did last year. And so it's just, I think there's just a lot of frustration because it seems like the Bears constantly strive for mediocrity. It's like, let's just do the best we can to be average. And I think Bears fans are finally tired of that. Yeah.
So this is a two-part question. Obviously, I don't know. Obviously, you have better insight than me. So how close were they in the Russell Wilson discussions? Obviously, the Seahawks didn't want to trade him unless it was a big haul. So do you know how close they were in the discussion? And also, are you surprised that they didn't go after Carson Wentz or Sam Darnold, who just got traded to the Panthers?
Now, allegedly, and this is how the story goes, that there was a pro day in North Dakota. One could maybe draw the line to connect the dots that it might have been Trey Lance's pro day. But either way, apparently there were discussions at this pro day in North Dakota, and the offer was basically 3 first-round picks and 2 starters, and they were pretty close. Now, once again, don't quote me as this being gospel, but this is what the tale says, that they were very close on this. And then Pete Carroll, the head coach of Seattle, basically said, no, we're not. And because Pete Carroll is one of the older head coaches in the league. And I'm sure that he doesn't really want to go through. I don't blame him. If he's 70 years old or whatever he is, he probably doesn't want to go through a 2-3 year rebuild. He doesn't know if he's going to be coaching in 2-3 years. So no, don't get rid of Russell Wilson. I don't care if I get 3 first-round picks. I'm not going to be around to see them. So I can kind of understand that reasoning in a bit, but apparently it was pretty close. That the Bears were all in on trying to get Russell Wilson. That was plan 1A from the get-go. Am I surprised they didn't go after Darnold or Wentz? I don't think that I wasn't too surprised when even though this is how it works. Anytime that a quarterback becomes available, automatically he could be going to Chicago, just because Chicago never has a quarterback. So they always say, oh, Chicago could be a fit. Chicago could be a fit. It doesn't matter who it is. But it was a running joke between Bears fans that every time that a quarterback allegedly could be available, it's like, oh, Bears, like Derek Carr, Jameis Winston, Marcus Mariota, Carson Wentz, Sam Darnold. They're always linked to the Bears for one reason or another. But I wasn't surprised they didn't make a formal offer for Carson Wentz just because of the price tag involved, and the Bears already kind of have salary cap issues, and you're not really sure what you're getting back for him at that point. So I wasn't overly surprised about that. I thought maybe they'd kick the tires on Sam Darnold. I thought maybe that they would maybe give that a shot, but I think that at the very least they wanted somebody that has proven that they can be adequate. Right. And that's I think that's what Andy Dalton is. He's had some pretty good years in Cincinnati, showed some flashes and occasionally when he was playing in Dallas last year, but he also had CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper and Ezekiel Elliott and a much better offensive line in Dallas. So we'll see what he can do in Chicago, but and so when I heard that he was linked, the Bears were linked to Andy Dalton, I was just like, yeah, so is every other quarterback. I certainly did not expect him to actually sign there. And so when he did, I thought to myself, okay, so now the quarterback room is Andy Dalton and Nick Foles, and this team is allegedly in win now mode. So I'm trying to think to myself what the next move is. So I thought, okay, whatever, they didn't trade 3 first-round picks to get Russell Wilson like they had hoped. Maybe they're going to put a package together to try to move up in the draft, and they're going to try to get one of these top 5 guys. But after seeing what San Fran had to give up to move up to number 3, and it's basically a foregone conclusion that 3 quarterbacks are going off the board, 1, 2, 3. It's going to be probably Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, and if you want to listen to the reports, Mac Jones going to San Francisco. But but either way, they didn't trade up to number 3 to not take a quarterback, so it's going to be one of those quarterbacks. So that leaves you with Justin Fields and Trey Lance, and the Bears don't pick until number 20. And so there's a lot of quarterback needy teams. And I know that as of today, the Falcons are open to trading the number 4 pick, but I don't think the Bears are going to be able to put together a more appetizing package than, say, Denver, who's already in the top 10, or another one of these teams that has a better pick, unless the Bears just go buck wild and give up 3 first-round picks to move from 20 to 4. And they give up the farm to move up to number 4, and they can draft the Fields or Lance or whoever is left there. But they better be in love with that guy. That they better not be drafting that guy just because he's what's left out of the top 5. Like, oh, we loved Mac Jones, but he went number 3. So, you know what? We'll take Trey Lance. Don't do it unless you know the guy you love is going to be there. And so I still think that they're going to hold fast at number 20 and then end up taking a day 2 quarterback, like perhaps Kellen Mond out of Texas A&M, just a guy that can sit behind Dalton for a year and then potentially take over the reins when Dalton's contract's up next year.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see what the Bears do. But obviously, so when it comes to the draft, do you see we could potentially see like 4 or 5 quarterbacks go in the first round? So, but do you see any like surprises happening in the first round instead of seeing quarterbacks going in a row?
Sure, I think that the NFL has become a little more fan friendly when it comes to trades, because it used to be, and I mean, you always saw trades with the draft, but you never really saw, these trades within like players. And, a lot of these teams were very conservative. You don't trade the guys that you have. But so now we've seen Carson Wentz get traded. We've seen Jared Goff get traded. We've seen Matt Stafford get traded. We've seen Sam Darnold get traded. A lot of mobility in the NFL right now. So I think what you could see in draft night is, I don't want to say an unprecedented amount, but I think you're going to see a lot of movement, and I think it could potentially involve some actual players, because there are teams that would say, I'm only saying that because I think the Bears could be one of those teams where they say, we'll give you 2 first-round picks and maybe Akeem Hicks, or we'll give you 2 first-round picks and Eddie Jackson, or whatever. I mean, something of that nature, because I don't think the Bears want to give up 3 first-round picks, and I think that they're already in a rough salary situation this year where they would love to clear off $10 million from Akeem Hicks' contract. Now, that once again goes against their philosophy this year, because apparently they're trying to win now. Right. You don't win now by trading away one of your best defensive players after you already cut one of your best defensive players in Kyle Fuller, who was your number 1 cornerback. The Bears are apparently in win now mode, but they're open to cutting some of their best players. So it's just the Bears are an enigma wrapped in a question. And so it's going to be interesting, but I think there's going to be a lot of mobility on draft night, especially if the quarterback, and it's been almost a foregone conclusion that a quarterback is going to go 1, 2, and 3. Right. I think there's going to be a lot of teams scrambling for those other 2 quarterbacks who might be in dire straits, like Denver, possibly Detroit. Even though they have Jared Goff locked up, they might try to move. You look at teams like New England. Right. I guess the Panthers are out on a quarterback now because they traded for Darnold, and I think they already offered him his 5th round his 5th year option, so he'll be back next year as well. But there are plenty of teams that you think about and it's like, yeah, they might move up if the opportunity is right. So I think there's going to be a lot of competition there. So you might see some really lopsided deals when it comes to draft capital and what they're actually moving up for, because a lot of teams need quarterbacks, and it looks like there's only going to be 2 that are really obtainable outside of the top 3.
Yeah. So my next question here, I gotta ask you, do you for the Bears now at 20, if they do Sam Pat, or if they find a way to trade up, but if they do Sam Pat, what do you think? Do you think they go for offensive line at 20, or because they, like you said, they need more offensive help to protect Andy Dalton if he is a starter?
Yeah, I think that they probably do go offensive lineman, and I'm only saying I think they do because I think that I actually, because I want them to, because I think they need to bolster the offensive line, especially at the tackle position. The interior line's okay. We saw some flashes last year, but they basically, Charles Leno, the starting left tackle, he's probably gone after this year, and his play hasn't lived up to what they had hoped it would be. They'd cut Bobby Massey, who was their starting right tackle. They signed Jermaine Ifedi to a 1-year deal to play right tackle. So they definitely need help on the tackle position. So if they do, in fact, stay pat at number 20, they need to get protection for whoever the quarterback's going to be. And both Dalton and Foles have shown some durability issues occasionally. So if Dalton goes down and Nick Foles comes in, then you definitely need protection, because that guy wears cement shoes and he can't run. So they need protection there. And I think that's probably their best bet. That's probably their biggest need. And I think that would be something that could definitely help the team. Now, I think that they might go quarterback in round 2. And then after cutting Kyle Fuller a couple weeks ago, they may need to address the cornerback position in the 3rd round or so. And then they can always bolster their wide receiving core. And then it becomes a crapshoot after that. You probably just take the best player available. But I think in the first couple rounds, you're going to see them address the offensive line, quarterback, and then probably maybe another defensive back. So if I were the GM, which I'm not the GM, so I'm not getting, so I don't know as much as they do, or at least I shouldn't know as much as they do. I would say that offensive linemen would probably be a big priority for them, just because not only is it kind of a weakness, but they're also likely going to lose 2 of their starters after this year as well.
All right, I got a couple more things here before we let you go. I want to ask you, are you surprised, speaking of Kyle Fuller, who would release this type of guy, man? Like, this guy's a stud, Kyle Fuller, and then he finds a deal in Denver quickly. And what kind of team releases that type of player? Like, is it for like a cap issue, or they couldn't afford him? What was the problem?
Yeah, so you notice how quickly Vic Fangio, his former coach in Chicago, scooped him up because he knows what kind of player he is. Kyle Fuller did not get cut for any other reason that the Bears have screwed up their salary cap. And that kind of proves that the cap is not a myth, because he truly was a cap casualty. And I guess there were reports that they asked him to take a pretty significant pay cut. And if you're Kyle Fuller and you're still in the, you're still in the prime of your career, but you're not going to be in your prime forever, why would you take a pay cut to stay with a team when you could get cut and go take a $9.5 million deal with Denver? So they had to make so many band-aids on their salary cap. Now, if they don't sign Andy Dalton for $10 million, they're probably able to keep Kyle Fuller, but we're not sure who's playing quarterback then. It's frustrating, because once again, this goes back to my recurring theme, whereas the Bears are apparently in win now mode. So in order to win now, they cut their best defensive back. And so as a cap casualty, and to upgrade your team, you sign Andy Dalton. I don't know if that really offsets. I don't know if that's really an upgrade, losing your best cornerback and then you gain Andy Dalton as your starter. I'm not saying the two are completely interconnected, but they're kind of. I'm surprised they didn't cut Jimmy Graham, because they would have saved enough money to potentially save Kyle Fuller there. But they must really like what Jimmy Graham brings to the tight end table, despite the fact they drafted Cole Kmet last year, who we think is going to be a pretty darn good tight end moving forward. So the whole Kyle Fuller thing is frustrating, because they basically had to get under the cap, or for cap situation, but they're in that. But that doesn't cut them any slack either, because they put themselves in that position, because they have to constantly chase after things. They had to let Leonard Floyd go, or they didn't have to leave him go, but they let Leonard Floyd go so they could sign Robert Quinn to a massive contract, which he has not lived up to yet. Khalil Mack is worth his contract, but it's still a lot of money being put into there. There's a lot of money going into Akeem Hicks, a lot of money into Eddie Jackson, a lot of money on the defensive side of the ball, which is why the defense is still the strength of this team. But they constantly have to put Band-Aids on things. So if you look at Ryan Pace's entire, tenure as GM, drafted Kevin White in the first round, I think 7th overall, didn't work out. Had to go get Allen Robinson in free agency. Now that worked out. That was a good signing, and they still aren't able to get a long-term deal with him, but that's neither here nor there. But so they draft Leonard Floyd. They let him go, and they put the Band-Aid on with Robert Quinn. They draft Adam Shaheen in the 2nd round to be their tight end of the future. Didn't really work, and they go out and they give Trey Burton a big deal. Neither one of those guys worked out. They couldn't stay healthy. So in order to put a Band-Aid on that, they got to go sign Jimmy Graham and use another 2nd round pick on on Cole Kmet. They go out and they trade up to get Mitchell Trubisky. They get Mitchell Trubisky as insurance to Mike Glennon. Glennon didn't work out. Trubisky didn't work out. So the Band-Aid on top of that was Nick Foles. Well, Foles didn't work out. So they put another Band-Aid on top of that Band-Aid with Andy Dalton. So you just look at this progression throughout the years, and no wonder their salary cap is all messed up, because they have to keep putting Band-Aids on mistakes, and you don't actually get to address the needs of your team because you're trying to compensate for all the things you screwed up. So that's what it's been for the last 6 years under Ryan Pace, and for the last 3 years with Matt Nagy, who and Matt Nagy doesn't get a free pass either, because he obviously he wasn't there when they drafted Mitchell Trubisky, but he was there when they decided that they thought Nick Foles was going to be the guy. Whenever all those free agent quarterbacks were available, they traded a 4th round pick for Nick Foles. They could have had Andy Dalton. They didn't sign him then. They got Nick Foles because they thought he was the guy. They could have they were showing interest in Teddy Bridgewater and Jameis Winston and Mariota and all these guys, but they wanted Nick Foles. So, and then Matt Nagy has not shown that he's able to craft an offense around his players. He still wants to run the Kansas City offense in Chicago, but he doesn't have the players that he had in Kansas City. And so whenever you saw Mitch struggling, obviously Mitch plays better out of play action. He works better when he's on the move. They need to run the ball more. One of the biggest knocks on Matt Nagy is that he completely forgets about the run game. When you have David Montgomery, who is an emerging stud in this league, they kind of just disregard the running game. And then you put all this pressure on Nick Foles and Mitchell Trubisky to win you games, and it's just not going to happen. So the blame goes on the coach just as much, and it took them 10 weeks to figure out the right configuration on the offensive line when the offensive line was horrendous. We thought that, honestly, whenever we were talking on my show, and a lot of the sports media people in Chicago saying they need 5 new linemen, and then finally they found the right combination, but they were stubborn for so long that they thought that, if you just keep beating your head against the wall, eventually it would break down. It didn't. They had to go around the wall. And so they figured it out, but there's just a lot of blame to go around. The players they bring in aren't good enough. The coach can't get enough out of his player, and the GM it's like, once again, cyclical. This team is cyclical. The GM brings in the wrong players. The head coach refuses to craft the game plan around those players. Team just keeps losing. So it is what it is.
Yeah. So before we get to the last 3 things, this is a 2-part question. The first one here, like I said, I'm a big Dallas Cowboy fan, and we had the 10th pick. I've been hearing this name that's flying off the board lately, Jace Horn from South Carolina. And then you have Patrick Surtain and the other defensive backs, and my Cowboys need another corner for sure. So if you were a Dallas GM, and if you were stuck between Jace Horn or Surtain, who would you take at number 10? And then I'll say the next part afterwards.
Yeah, it's hard for me not to go with the upfront guy, just because those guys are hard to find. But Surtain's also not just a good corner. He's also kind of a playmaker, has a little bit of sizzle in his game. Either way, Dallas needs somebody on defense because a lot of their money is allocated onto that offense with Dak, Zeke, and Amari Cooper. So they need some young talent on that defense, which obviously has struggled. Man, I love Surtain. I love Surtain. So it's possibility I might actually shade towards the cornerback in that situation, just because you're talking about Horn. He's been shooting up draft boards, but we're still trying to figure out why. Whereas I see tangible reasons why I would take Surtain so high, and he has the lineage with his dad. I think it's his dad playing in the league as well. So I'd probably go corner there with a pretty proven commodity out of a Nick Saban kind of coach, Alabama defense cornerback. I like the pedigree. I think I'd shade towards him.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering. And now the next part too, I want to go back to your show. And obviously I had Allie Redding on the show too. Like you had Allie on your show too. And that was I listened to the whole episode. That was awesome. And she's amazing. And it was an honor talking to her. And she's a busy woman, especially what she's in the agency world. But do you have you guys have anything like lined up coming up soon on your show, like guest wise? And do you have anything like you guys have anything to announce that you want to share?
Sure. And so first, Allie was a great guest, and that's on our other show. That's the other show that I host alongside Alyssa Barbieri at the Barroom Network called Pass the Mic. And that is a project that we take so much pride in because we started it in the summer, and it's a show that spotlights women in sports and sports media. Yeah. And so it really it's sometimes it's an uncomfortable conversation because it's you don't want to believe that this stuff still goes on in 2021. Yeah. And so you talk to some of these amazing women who have accomplished so much in their career, and they talk about the harassment and the obstacles and the mistreatment and the trolls on social media, and it's just it's heartbreaking. But a lot of them say, and we hear this all the time, a lot of them say this is the first time I've really brought this up, or this is the first time I've really talked about it, because they say, if I would have brought this up in my workplace, I don't want to be the one that comes off as, oh, I'm stirring the pot, or I'm causing trouble for somebody, or I'm telling on people. And that's just awful. So that show was created to give a space where we can have those conversations, where we can spotlight the fact that this kind of behavior is still happening right now. And it's different. Just from my perspective, when I listen to these stories and I talk to these women and we interview them and we hear everything that they've done and everything they've gone through, I knew that this stuff was still going on. That's why we created the show. But at the same time, when you hear that personal story where someone's actually talking to you and you can put a face and a name and they're literally telling you what happened, it really gives you a new perspective, because I think there's a lot of people that if they had to go through some of this stuff, they would not stick it out. And we've had so many stories about women who were, mistreated by male coworkers, or they were mistreated by female coworkers, or people who degrade their accomplishments because they say, well, you only got that because you're a woman, or of course he's going to talk to you because look how you're dressed, or accusing people of sleeping with bosses because that's how they got promotion. And as a man working in that industry, I never faced any of that. And I'm saying that because I think a lot of people in this industry, men especially, they don't deal with it, so they don't think it's real. Right. And that's really unfortunate. So if we can just make a little bit of a difference by getting those stories out, then we are doing our part. And also we do talk about sports with them as well, because that's what their profession is, that's what they're great at. So we talk about their accomplishments, we talk about the struggles, but also what they've been able to do and what they're currently working on, and whether it's an athlete or it's a show, or it's somebody who has a show, or we talk to a lot of different women in a lot of different industries. So that has been a privilege to work on that show with Alyssa Barbieri, and I appreciate the Barroom Network when I presented the show to them, that being completely on board 100%, didn't really ask any questions at all. They said, yes, this is a necessary show, put it in production, let's see what we can do. And so Alyssa, who also is my co-host on Buffone 55, we're kind of the dynamic duo over there. We threw the show together, we produced it, and it's just been incredible to work on. So really, we reach out to everyone, and so it's the off season, so we're not doing as frequent as we normally do. I think it's every other week now. So we're always looking for people to spotlight. We're always looking for different stories. We're always looking for impactful stories. And then once the summer comes around, we really start ramping it up again. But that has been an incredibly rewarding experience to be a part of, because I have learned so much, and I hope our listeners have as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. Actually, my co-host, she's a female too, Alyssa Tarleson. She covers Gonzaga basketball, so that's why reason why she couldn't be here with all from the recent episodes I had, and she's been in Indy the whole week for covering the March Madness, and she is amazing. And I'm a big advocate in women in sports, and I'm glad to have a female as my co-host, like just like you. And obviously, we have a team of 6 helping us out with the show too, and we have 4 or 5 females part of the team too. So yeah, as much we need to get more females involved in the sports industry, and I'm just happy to see where this is going, and we would like to get your co-host on the show too at some point, Alyssa. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, she's great. She's also the managing editor over at Bears Wire, which I believe is under that USA Today umbrella. She churns out so many articles. I don't know how she does it, because she churns out so many Bears articles, and plus she's a teacher, and wow. So I just I don't know where she finds the time to do all this. She is amazing. Plus she helps produce our shows on the Barroom Network. She's kind of the glue that keeps us together there a lot of the time. So she's wonderful. I always appreciate her input. And it was interesting because we started doing the show, we started doing Pass the Mic, and maybe it was my own ignorance, because after the show we were talking, she's like that something like that was similar to what I went through, and I was just like, oh my God, like as much as like Alyssa is my friend and she's my coworker and like she's my producer, I just like, this is affecting you just as much. And I was like, how could I have just overlooked this? And that was, I felt terrible, because I'm like, you're going through a lot of this same stuff as well. And here I am, just almost not bringing it up. So it's one of those things where you hear it once and then you're on the lookout for it again, because it's just like, you're aware of it then. And you try to better yourself. And hopefully when people listen to that, they try to better themselves as well, because a lot of the times you don't even know you're doing it. Whenever I think, when I think it was Alyssa or someone else said, it's kind of a backhanded compliment when someone says, you know a lot about sports for a girl. And that's kind of, I get that the intention there might have been good, but at the same time, why is it like, oh, for a girl, like somehow that level's different? And so you learn about a lot of that stuff, and it's just been like I said, a lot of things that and it's incredible how candid a lot of these women have been talking about their experience. And that's what we encourage. Be as honest and raw and go into as much detail as you wish. And we've heard some things that are uncomfortable to hear sometimes. And so, but it's important to listen to that, because if we just sweep it under the rug and pretend like it didn't happen, then nothing gets changed. So it's important to have those conversations, bring it out to light. And hopefully, like I said, if we're able to make just a tiny, minuscule difference, then the show will be a success.
Yeah. So the last 3 things here, obviously, our team, the NR show, we partnered up with the company called Eplin X Cosmetics. This is if your mom or your grandmother or whoever is interested, our promo code for that company is NR20. So go check that out. I just want to bring that up. We just partnered up with that company like 2 days ago with our show. So we're just trying to add more traffic to it and help them at the same time. So the promo code again is NR20. So, and then the last 2 things here, our team is also part of the Hugh Jackson Foundation. Obviously, former NFL coach. He's trying to get back into coaching, but focus on this foundation. We're ambassadors for him. We're trying to help him prevent human trafficking and making sure the community is safe, making sure the kids stay safe too. So I'm going to send you the page so you can check out the foundation. It's really inspiring what they're doing. So, and the last thing here, would you like to say anything to all the nurses, doctors, and essential workers right now?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because I have a lot of, friends, relatives. In fact, my girlfriend is an ICU nurse who worked in the COVID unit throughout the years. And you see what they go through. And when they come home saying I had to hold up an iPad so someone could say goodbye to family, and that's the kind of stuff where it's heartbreaking for the family and they're losing a loved one, but you don't think about the nurses that have to bring that home as well. So there's a whole other thing that I think that people don't think about when it comes to a lot of healthcare workers. And so the fact that you can be so mentally strong to do that day in and day out, and the fact that a lot of them knew that they were going into work and at least one, if not two or more people were going to die under their watch. And that's heartbreaking. And, and it's heartbreaking for everybody, everyone involved is heartbreaking for. So there's nothing but appreciation that comes from me. And I don't know how they do it. I mean, it takes a different kind of strong to be able to do all that. So it is greatly appreciated. This whole, I was lucky. I mean, depending on how you look at it, but I had COVID, and I did not have to be hospitalized. I had some mild symptoms, but even when she came home, my girlfriend would take care of me over that stuff, because I had terrible migraines, no taste and smell, a lot of cognitive issues. That was probably the biggest thing, where I couldn't get my, as a radio host or a podcast host, imagine not being able to get your thoughts from here to here. It was the worst thing. I'm like, if this is forever, then I guess I'm done, because I can't get thoughts from my head to my mouth. But luckily that subsided a little bit. Yeah, there's still gonna be, who knows if it's just natural, but able to overcome that. So it's just I only say that because it's such a tiny experience in this entire thing. So obviously just incredible appreciation for them.
Well said. And tell your girlfriend I said thank you for her service. That's the main thing. They deserve a pay raise for sure, all these nurses. So, and they're the real MVPs. But there it is. This wraps up episode 741 with the great sports journalist John Buffone from Chicago. You can find the show Buffone 55. They do great stuff, and also Bear Barroom. And then you have the Pass on the Mic podcast with Alyssa. And man, this has been an honor. Thank you for joining our show. We would love to have you back as a returning guest, so you can meet my co-host Alyssa and the full team at some point. So just keep up the great work, and good luck to the Bears and the rest of the way in the draft. And but thank you again.
We need it.
Yeah, you and your family stay safe.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. Anytime, reach out.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. All right.